Would you be able to survive if all you had left in your refrigerator was bread and imagination? Today we will discover more than just old recipes. We will discover a real survival kitchen where each sandwich was more than food. They were bits of warmth made up from leftovers. They were strategies for when money ran out and hunger did not. Our grandparents didn't take food photos or look for likes. They preserved life and dignity by stacking bread with onions, potatoes, or a drop of fat. These sandwiches weren't sold in cafés, but they were a taste of childhood, a symbol of caring, and the quiet heroism of ordinary people. Each of these sandwiches is like a window into a past that smells of vinegar, jam, fried onions, and a stubborn, proud, I can handle it. Ready to get a real taste of resilience? Canned Saira or tuna sandwich. When a can of tuna or saury was opened, the kitchen was immediately filled with that recognizable smell. Fishy, salty, a little metallic. The fish was kneaded with a fork in a deep bowl, being careful not to injure yourself on the sharp edges. We added a pinch of salt, a drop of mayonnaise, sometimes a slice of onion, if there was any. It was poor man's pasta, affordable but nutritious. It was spread thickly on dried bread, often yesterday's bread. Sometimes, if there was no mayonnaise in the house, they made do with just fish and hope it tasted good. They were served with tea or powdered lemonade at a table where a tablecloth was optional. These sandwiches were eaten by school children, construction workers, single mothers, grandmothers, everyone. The flavor was pungent, intense, like life itself in hard times. Sometimes on good days, they would put a pickle or some greens on top. Each bite was a reminder that food was first and foremost a necessity, and then gastronomy. These sandwiches were made for lunch, wrapped in wax paper, taken to work or school. They were not a delicacy, but they gave a feeling of satiety and something homely. Children cringed, adults ate them silently, gratefully. Saira was cheaper than tuna and was often bought by the case at sales. A tin can hid the energy for the day. Sometimes, if there was some left over, they mixed the leftovers with noodles. The flavor is as strong as the smell of an old kitchen. It takes you back to a time when you could spread joy on bread. Because against the background of general scarcity, it was a holiday. And even now, when you open a tin, you can hear the whisper of the past. We ate this to survive, and we survived. Garlic sandwich bread. Garlic was the poor man's weapon of choice. Inexpensive, sharp, strong. It replaced sauces, meat, even mood. A head of garlic was taken apart, crushed with a knife, and spread on stale bread. If you were lucky, there was some lard, butter, or even margarine in the kitchen. It softened the flavor, added fatness, and reminded that life could be softer. Bread with garlic burned the tongue but awakened the blood. It was eaten before hard work, because garlic gave strength, as if putting the energy of the earth into the body. Children wrinkled their brows, but adults nodded. It's good for you. Sometimes they put a pinch of salt on top, and then the flavor was revealed in a new way, as if the garlic began to sing. It was an energy sandwich, an energizer before the advent of energy drinks. It smelled strong, and you knew who ate it. They took it with them to the field, to the construction site, to the factory. It didn't spoil, it didn't melt, it didn't drip, it was reliable. It smelled like home, where everything was real, tart, loud, alive. This sandwich was eaten not because they loved it, but because they knew it helped. It warmed, awakened, even cured a little. Garlic was considered a natural pharmacy, an antiseptic, an amulet, a symbol of fortitude. Sometimes garlic was mixed with grated potatoes and put as a paste to make it more nourishing. There were families where dried herbs were added to garlic. Someone rubbed the crust for crunch. It was not worth repeating in the evening. The neighbors might complain, but in the morning, everything was forgiven. In the morning, it was like a flag. I'm hanging in there. Even now, when someone makes toast with garlic, there is something ancient, ancestral about it. The memory of my grandmother, who with a smile rubbed bread with a clove, as if she was making an amulet. Because poverty is frightening, but garlic protects. And this knowledge is transmitted without words from the first bite. Onion sandwich with vinegar. This sandwich could scare away friends, but build character. Thin rings of raw onions were soaked in vinegar, a simple, white, pungent vinegar that brought tears to your eyes before the first bite. After 15 minutes, the onion became soft, almost transparent, but retained all its poisonous nature, as if it did not want to give in. Butter or margarine was put on the bread, and this vinegared onion, moist and shiny, was placed on top. Sometimes they'd sprinkle black pepper on everything, and then it would be a real flavor storm. We ate quickly because the flavor pierced the sinuses like horseradish and gave us a boost of energy stronger than any coffee. Tears were shed, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of economy version, tears of everyday life. This was the kind of sandwich adults ate before work, especially those who had no other protein or meat. Onions cost pennies and a jar of vinegar would last a long time. It was an investment in survival. It was often dinner after a hard day. Bread, onions, a mug of water, and silence. It was eaten alone, not shared, because the flavor was too personal. It wasn't a delicacy. It was a compromise made without cheating. But sometimes adding a little sugar made almost a salad and life seemed softer. This sandwich made you feel you're alive, you're breathing, you're struggling. It pinched your mouth, your nose, your soul. It cleansed like grief, but it gave strength like endurance. It was not served to guests, but was eaten with respect. Many remember him as a sandwich of despair, but with pride. He was honest. He didn't pretend to be a burger or a hearty meal. It just was, like the man who ate it. Because to survive, sometimes all you need is bread, a little vinegar, and patience, and a strong spirit. Liver pudding on bread. The liver is the organ of the poor. It is cheap, nourishing, and stores iron and labor, almost like poverty itself. When there was leftover chicken or pork liver, it was not thrown away. That would be a crime against the house. It was put through a creaky meat grinder, mixed with flour, fried onions, salt, and sometimes egg if there was any. The result was a thick mass, unappetizing to look at, but rich. It was baked in the oven in an old mold until the very tart, spicy smell began to waft through the kitchen. The result was a dense pudding, not a dessert, but a food of endurance. It was sliced and placed on bread, warm when it was still steaming, or cold as the remnants of yesterday's struggle. It didn't have a luxurious flavor, but it was real. It resembled meat when there was no meat. It was eaten with respect, like something that came from hands, not a can. Sometimes a little nutmeg or pepper or a pinch of garlic was added to mask the bitterness. It wasn't taken to school. The smell gave it away, and it was teased. But at home, at the kitchen table, it was the center of the dinner, around which they gathered. Sometimes it was even saved for guests as a sign of respect. Young children didn't always understand why to eat such food, but adults knew. It was a symbol of economy and care at the same time. It was a reminder that poverty was not an excuse for humiliation, but for ingenuity. Liver was the food of those who didn't give up, who knew how to turn humble leftovers into a food with a story. It was a sandwich with character. It didn't scream, but it spoke firmly. "We will survive," the warm bits on the bread whispered, and survive they did. Because each slice was not just food, but an act of strength. Cornflake sandwich. It sounds absurd, but in many families it was a daily breakfast or snack. When there wasn't enough milk for a bowl of cereal, and there was still cereal, they put it between two slices of bread. They crunched merrily as if to pretend everything was normal. Sometimes a drop of milk or margarine was added to bind the dryness. Kids loved this sandwich. Adults tolerated it. It was sweet without being sweet. Sometimes unsweetened cereal was used and sugar was put on top. This sandwich was the brainchild of a kitchen where nothing was thrown away. Leftovers from the box, scraps and crumbs all went in, wrapped in paper, taken outside, on the road to school. It rustled with every bite. It also gave energy because cereal is carbohydrate, albeit empty. Sometimes it came with a glass of water and sugar, an impromptu, happy drink. It was more than food. It was creative survival. It didn't satiate you for long, but it gave you the feeling of having eaten. And at times when the fridge was nearly empty, That feeling meant a lot. Even if the bread was stale and the cereal was dried out, that sandwich was a prime example of how food becomes a game, a comfort, and a strategy. It was for those who knew how to make a lot out of nothing. And it was a reminder, as long as there is bread and a little imagination, there is hope. Sandy sandwich. It looked like a cookie, but it wasn't. 2 saltine crackers with melted margarine in between. Sometimes a drop of honey or a drop of jam if it was a holiday. It tasted a little greasy, a little salty, but strangely pleasant. It was made in the 50s, 60s, and even 80s, when there was nothing left for sweets. It was a poor man's imitation of a dessert. A kid could make it himself. Get crackers, squeeze margarine, press it down, done. We sat around the TV, ate these sandwiches, and felt a little richer than we were. Sometimes they crumbled in their hands and crumbs were collected with a finger from their knees. It was not served to guests, but was eaten with pleasure. He was a memory of a little treat in great short supply. When my father would walk by and say, "Those shortbreads again?" and then eat a couple himself. They only appeared when there was nothing else available. They were eaten alone or shared by 2 people, 1 slice at a time. There was something almost childlike about that sandwich, comforting, like a game. And it was a reminder that even in poverty, you can find flavor. And as long as there are crackers, there will be something that binds. Bread with canned beans and tomato sauce, straight from the can with a spoon and on bread. It was a lazy lunch, but one of the most frequent in the 30s and 40s. A can of beans was cheap and could feed a family. It was opened with a knife because can openers weren't always available. The beans were put in cold or heated in a pot. The tomato sauce spread over the bread, making it soft, almost like a casserole. Sometimes onions or peppers were added, if there were any, but most often just beans. It was a taste of humble abundance, because after a piece of bread with beans, you didn't want to eat for another 3 or 4 hours. It was hearty, simple, reliable. Even if the bread was dried out, the beans gave it life back. On work lunches, it was king. Someone would put another slice of bread on top and make a sandwich. Sometimes the beans were left on their fingers, and they were licked off respectfully. This sandwich was a little bit southern, a little bit northern. It was eaten by farmers, teachers, students. It wasn't about flavor, it was about power, and it worked. Tomato sandwich. When the garden started producing, tomatoes were used for everything, especially for sandwiches. Warm, ripe, sun-scented tomatoes were cut into thin slices. Lay it on white bread, preferably a little dried out. We added salt, pepper, and, if there was, a little mayonnaise. The juice was absorbed into the bread, and the sandwich had to be eaten quickly before it became mush. But that's what the high was all about. It was a summer sandwich, a field sandwich, a tan sandwich. It was eaten standing at the sink, on the porch, at a picnic. It was a reminder that flavor could be simple. Sometimes it came with cheese or a slice of bacon, if there was any, but more often just a tomato. It was the lunch of the cottager, the country child, the grandmother's garden. And though it cost almost nothing, it was almost everything. Its flavor was memorable. And decades later, biting into a ripe tomato, you suddenly remember the summer of 1974, and your grandmother's smile, and the sun in the kitchen, and that sandwich. Bread with roasted apples. When apples started falling from the trees, grandmothers knew what to do. Cut slices, fry them in margarine with sugar, sometimes with cinnamon, and put them on bread at once. Hot, caramelized apples soaked the bread to the last crumb. It was like pie, but without the dough. The children looked forward to this treat with anticipation. It was eaten with a spoon right off the bread or wrapped up like a roll. Sometimes raisins were added, sometimes nothing. It was the dessert of the poor, but with soul. The smell of fried apples filled the house with comfort. Even if the day was hard, it became softer. Apples were free, from a tree, from an abandoned orchard, from neighbors. Margarine cost pennies, and happiness was in every bite. This sandwich smelled of fall, of village, of school. It was eaten for breakfast, lunch, and secretly for dinner. And every bite was a reminder that sweetness can be made even from the simplest things. Leftover fried rice sandwich. Dinner leftovers were rarely thrown away. They were used to make the next day's meal. Fried rice, with onions, soy sauce, leftover eggs or vegetables, went into a sandwich. Cold or slightly warm, it was placed on bread as a dense mass. Sometimes a drop of ketchup was added on top. Or if you were lucky, a spoonful of mayonnaise. The sandwich was heavy but satisfying. It was taken to school, to work, to the field. They ate it with their hands without napkins, but with pleasure. Everyone knew there would be lunch, and he would work. Sometimes rice was with pieces of meat, then it was considered a luxury. Such a sandwich gave energy for the whole day. He was rational, economical, and resourceful. It didn't require anything extra. And everyone knew that in a house where they made a rice sandwich, they knew how to hold on. They know how to survive. They know how to be strong in the simplest things. Tea sandwich with butter and cinnamon. These sandwiches were made in the morning, when it was especially cold and there were no cookies or pies in the house. Bread, preferably white and slightly dried, was spread generously with butter. Sometimes it was real butter, more often it was margarine, but the flavor did not suffer. The top was sprinkled with a mixture of sugar and ground cinnamon, sweet pollen from childhood. It scattered on the plate, got on the fingers, and they were licked off. The sandwich was washed down with hot tea, sometimes with lemon, sometimes with milk, but more often just strong and black. It was simple, but it was comforting. Each bite crunched and melted in your mouth. The aroma of cinnamon filled the kitchen, making it a holiday, even though it was winter and the bills were due. This sandwich was made by mothers and grandmothers when it was necessary to please the children without cost. Sometimes it replaced dinner. Sometimes it was a reward for cleaning up. It wasn't luxurious, but it was caring. It was eaten alone by the window or alone, watching the steam from the mug. He used to say, "Life is hard, but you'll get through it." That's the kind of flavor that stays in your memory forever. Because it's not just sugar and butter, it's a simple miracle. Bread with leftover pasta. Pasta with sauce on bread may seem like a strange idea, but for many it was a life-saving meal. When dinner left behind a couple of spoonfuls of pasta, it wasn't thrown away. It was put between two slices of bread, pressed down with the palm of your hand, and you had a pasta sandwich. If there was a sauce, tomato or cheese, it was considered good luck. Sometimes the pasta was just butter and garlic. Even so, it made a hearty meal. It was taken to work, wrapped in waxed paper, put in a backpack. It was a symbol of practicality. Nothing to lose. The bread soaked up the sauce and the pasta gave texture. It was warm inside, like eating something forbidden tasty. Kids were shy in schools, but at home they ate it with gusto. It was carbonara without bacon. Some even sprinkled a little ketchup on top. Sometimes the sandwich was pan-fried, and then the crust crisped up like a panini. It was the culinary know-how of a generation raised on austerity. It didn't decorate the tables, but it satiated the souls. Because it was based on the principle, make the most out of the little. Pea paste, working in a fardan. Peas were cheap, stored for a long time, and they were used to make everything. If the green peas were boiled until soft, they were mashed with a drop of oil, salt, and sometimes a pinch of black pepper. The result was a thick, creamy mass, similar to country-style hummus. It was spread on bread, warm, toasted, or just yesterday's bread. The paste had an earthy flavor, but it was hearty and unexpectedly tender. It reminded me of tended vegetable gardens and kitchens with aluminum pots. Sometimes onions were added, lightly fried in fat, or just left as is. It was the perfect breakfast or lunch, quick, inexpensive, nutritious. Pasta was made in advance and stored in a jar, sometimes frozen. It was eaten with a spoon straight off the bread, like pâté. It didn't shine in cookbooks, but it lived on in notebooks of homemade recipes. It was the food of modesty and endurance. Vegetarian, not out of fashion, but out of necessity. Peas provided protein, bread provided calories. Together, they provided hope. When the house ran out of meat, milk, and cheese, pea paste remained, and its flavor became the flavor of quiet resistance to hardship. Boiled carrot sandwich. Carrots were boiled whole, cut lengthwise, sprinkled with salt, and put on bread. Sometimes they were lightly drizzled with vinegar or sunflower oil. It was a salad sandwich, a sandwich preparation. Its flavor was slightly sweet, slightly spicy, a combination of health and poverty. Such a sandwich was made in kindergartens, in army camps, in homes where they knew the value of every vegetable. Sometimes carrots were grated and mixed with sugar, and then it was almost a dessert. And if they added garlic and butter, it was almost a spicy pâté. It was simple to the extreme, but bright in color, in texture, in memory. It was eaten on lunch breaks on the porch, outside, on the go. It was made by mothers and grandmothers to diversify the diet in some way. It was a quiet answer to a loud hunger. Its flavor wasn't everyone's favorite, but it was part of the family. And today when someone makes warm carrots, they may suddenly remember, Grandma used to make a sandwich like this, didn't she? And it gets a little warmer. A sandwich with potato flour and lard. Lard was a luxury of the poor. It was cut thinly, melted in a frying pan, and then smeared on bread. But the secret was to sprinkle fried potato flour on top. It was made from leftover potatoes, dried, grated, and fried. The result was a crispy, flavorful crumb. It gave texture, flavor, and a sense of something different. This sandwich was dense, nourishing, like a brick against hunger. It was eaten before or after a hard day's work. It wasn't light, but it was a reminder that life goes on. Sometimes spices such as paprika and pepper were added to potato flour. It was poor man's lard with crunch. My hands smelled like the country, and your mouth smelled like contentment. This sandwich was passed down through the generations because it was an example of how to make a culinary delight out of leftovers, how you can never give up and find flavor even where there seems to be nothing. Bread with brown sugar and butter. This sandwich was made when you wanted something sweet, but there was no candy or cookies in the house. White or rye bread was spread with soft butter and sprinkled generously with brown sugar. It was larger than white, smelled of caramel and molasses, and crunched pleasantly on the teeth. The first bite was always special. The butter melted, the sugar began to stick to your palate, and for a second it felt like you were eating a pie. Sometimes brown sugar was a luxury, and it was substituted for regular sugar. The effect was almost the same. The sandwich was called dessert without an oven, and it really did give a holiday feeling. It was given to children when they came home from school hungry. They'd give it to guests in the middle of the day. It was a sandwich that had nothing extra, but everything you needed to be happy. Grandma ate it with a mug of coffee, Mom with tea, the child with milk. Sometimes we added cinnamon for flavor, sometimes honey if there was any left. There were times when butter was replaced with margarine, but the sandwich did not lose its magic. It was a symbol of home comfort, morning sun, and simple happiness. It is still eaten today by those who remember, those who know that the flavor is not in the expensive, it's in the moment, and in the person who made this sandwich for you. Flavorful, warm, with sugar crumbs on your lips, like a kiss from childhood. The poor man's pizza sandwich. This sandwich was the answer to the dreams of real pizza, which was eaten by the heroes of TV shows. You took a slice of bread, smeared it with ketchup, put onion slices on top, some grated processed cheese, and put it in the oven. Sometimes the cheese was from scraps. Sometimes we replaced it with a slice of American cheese food. When it started to stretch, it seemed like a miracle. It smelled of tomatoes, warm bread, and fried onions. And it was the smell of a holiday. It was eaten while watching cartoons on a rainy day in a kitchen where everything creaked and was warmed by a single stove. It was hot with a crispy crust and slightly burnt corners. It seemed almost like a restaurant to the kids. Sometimes they would add a slice of sausage if there was any left, or a pickle ring. It was a dream sandwich, from a refrigerator with almost nothing in it. Its recipe was passed down orally, from neighbor to neighbor. It was shared like a secret to surviving with flavor. It was American-style Italian luxury, flavored with imagination and economy. It had nothing in common with pizza from a pizzeria, but had everything in common with childhood and love, because it was prepared with enthusiasm, because he was a desire to give flavor even without extra money. Pizza sandwich is the story of a family turning nothing into something very warm. Pea soup sandwich. Pea soup, thick, heavy, on the bone or not at all, was an almost obligatory dish in poor homes. If it turned into a thick mass the next day, it was not heated again, but spread on bread. Sometimes it was heated a little and made hot pea pate. The bread absorbed the salty, rich flavor, and the sandwich was warm, hearty, and unexpectedly delicious. It was survival food processed into something convenient. It was taken with you, in a lunchbox, in a paper bag, just in foil. It was heavy, not just in weight, but in feel. Such a sandwich could replace a lunch. Sometimes we put greens on top, if we had any, and sometimes it was just eaten with tea as it was. It didn't require meat, but it was complete. Its flavor was rich, a little smoky, especially if the soup was boiled on leftover ham. It had a sense of smoke, salt, labor, and simplicity. This sandwich was a symbol of ingenuity. Food recycling here was not a fashion, but a necessity. He used to say, "We don't throw anything away because we value it." And in poverty, that's the most important quality. And yes, it was delicious. It was real. Cold oatmeal sandwich with syrup. Oatmeal cooked in the morning. If there was any left over before lunch, became a sandwich filling. It solidified, thickened, became almost a pudding. You took a spoon, put it on the bread, spread it out. You'd add a drop of corn syrup or molasses on top, sometimes honey or maple syrup if there was any. The result was a sweet, delicate sandwich. Cool, but surprisingly satisfying. It was given to kids after school when there was no money for cookies. It tasted like oatmeal cookies, only raw. Sometimes the oatmeal had apple or raisin residue in it. Then it became almost festive. It was eaten slowly, often with a spoon, not even as a sandwich, but as a dessert. It was cold, but it was warming, because there was something cozy, grandmotherly about it. Its flavor, tart, oatmeal-y, with notes of syrup, stayed in my mouth for a long time. It was a reminder that even porridge can be special, if you approach it with imagination. A cold oatmeal sandwich was a humble treat that was always waiting in the fridge, and it didn't require much, just a little care. Bread with beer foam or yeast sourdough. When home-brewed beer or broth was brewed in the house, the foam would float to the surface. Warm, fragrant, yeasty. It was carefully removed with a spoon and smeared on warm or dried bread. It tasted strange, slightly bitter, bready, with notes of raw flour and future alcohol. But it was reminiscent of a time when everything was used. Children tasted it out of curiosity, adults with respect. If there was no beer, sourdough bread was used. It was sour but nutritious. This sandwich was considered a working sandwich to be eaten before a hard day's work. It made you feel full, warm, and invigorated. Sometimes sugar was sprinkled on top for balance. This flavor was half food, half drink. It had the feel of yeast life, of domestic labor. It was made quietly, simply, without much of a recipe. But it was part of the culture, part of survival, part of the home where everything was made by themselves, from the sourdough starter to the bread. It was a taste of poverty, but it was also a taste of independence. Because there was no store, just a kitchen, patience, and a bit of froth, as a sign that life was still fermenting. Soldiers' sandwich rations. These sandwiches didn't start in the kitchen, but in army camps, at drills, and in the trenches. Leftovers of canned meat from sea ration, tight, fatty, dense, were brought home gratefully without being spoiled. The meat was extracted with a spoon, sometimes cut with a knife, smeared on bread like paste. It was salty, with a distinct flavor of fat and salt, a little metallic because of the can. It was often eaten cold, straight from the knife, but it was nicer on bread. Sometimes it was heated over gas to make it softer. Soldiers called it brick sandwich because the weight and density could replace stone. It was eaten quietly without pathos. It was not a delicacy, but fuel. This sandwich was often eaten by fathers and grandfathers returning from war. It was a reminder of service and discipline. Sometimes it was put in the school lunch for children as a symbol of fortitude. The flavor was harsh, but honest. It had no seasoning, but it had a past. It wasn't a sandwich to enjoy. It was a sandwich to live. It said, "Here, you've had enough, and you're moving on." Even today, when you open an army stew, you can feel the echo of those years. It smelled of men's sweat, campfires, uniforms, and survival. It was the food of the soldier, and it became the food of the poor house. Because at home, they ate what was left, and they were thankful for it. Cornmeal sandwich, grits. The thick corn porridge cooked in the morning, if there was any left, cooled in the pot, thickened like cement. It wasn't thrown away. It was cut with a knife into slices, like cold meat, and put between two pieces of bread. Sometimes salt or a drop of margarine was added. Sometimes it was eaten just like that, cereal and bread, one in the other. It was a southern sandwich, dense, stretchy, but hearty. It didn't taste bright, but it provided energy. Grits were the food of black families, poor whites, rural people, anyone who knew how to get the most out of the least. It was eaten with tea or sweet water. Sometimes they put a thin slice of cheese on top, if there was any. Sometimes cold bacon, if there was any left over from the morning. But most of the time it was just porridge and bread. It didn't crunch, it didn't sing in your mouth, but it was reliable. It said, "You won't go hungry." You took that sandwich with you to the field, to school, on the road. It didn't spoil, you could eat it on the run. There was a lot of corn love in it. It's the kind of flavor you remember from old kitchen stoves and aluminum pots. It wouldn't show up on cooking shows, but it kept you warm, and it saved. Tomato stewed vegetable sandwich. The vegetable stew left over from last night's dinner was cooled down, and it became thick, almost like a spread. It was spread on bread, spread with a spoon, thick with drops of oil and bits of carrots, peppers, onions. Sometimes it was like lecco, sometimes like a meatless stew. The color was fiery red, the flavor like a real dish. Such a sandwich was hot or cold, always unexpectedly delicious. The vegetables were from a jar, from the vegetable garden, from canned food. Even if they were watery, the bread saved everything. It soaked up the juice, gave it shape. This sandwich was about generosity despite poverty. It was eaten as a family at the table, with the radio playing softly. Sometimes garlic or a drop of vinegar would be added, and then it would come to life. The flavor was warm, pulling from the depths of the pot. It was eaten when you wanted to feel that you were not eating leftovers, but a second course. It was the food of recycling, not garbage, but respect for labor. The vegetable sandwich was humble but real. It was a reminder that even what's left over can be a foundation, if you don't fear poverty but embrace it, and from it, to boil something good. Bread with jam without butter. When the house ran out of everything, even butter, there was still jam left. It was made from apple peels, plums, grapes, and unripe berries. Sometimes it was liquid like syrup, sometimes thick like jelly. It was spread directly on bread, even if it was dry. The jam would spread, stick, drip, and still be happy. The kids loved the sandwich because it was sweet, homemade, almost festive. Even if they ate it for breakfast on a gray Monday. Sometimes they added a pinch of sugar on top if the jam was sour. Bread with jam was a symbol of grandmother's care. Even without butter, it was delicious, because it was made not from ingredients, but from love. It was eaten with warm tea by the window, under a shabby curtain. There was sunshine in it, despite the lack of wealth. This sandwich was not ashamed to offer it to a guest, because it had a soul. And even when butter appeared again, many people continued to eat it the old-fashioned way, just bread and jam, because that was enough. And because sometimes simple is the best, bread crust and water sandwich. It was the sandwich of last resort, when there was nothing left, no butter, no vegetables, not even salt. Just old, dried-up bread crusts. You wet them with water, boiled or tap water. We pressed them with our hands to make them soft, and stacked on top of each other as if they were two slices of fresh bread. Sometimes a drop of vinegar or juice from a pickle jar. Sometimes just water. It wasn't flavor, it was survival. It was the kind of sandwich children ate when their parents went to work, leaving an empty kitchen. It was eaten by adults who lived through the Great Depression. It didn't satisfy hunger, but it made you feel like you were eating something. It was a food of shame, but it was a food of salvation. No one bragged about it, but everyone remembered it, and it had everything: hunger, shame, stubbornness, strength. Because even breadcrumbs and water could make a sandwich and survive another day. Amidst the crunchy toast and fancy recipes from TikTok, we forgot that food isn't always about gastronomy. Sometimes food is about memory, endurance, and love. These sandwiches weren't created by chefs, but by people who knew the value of every crumb. They taught not only how to get full, they taught how to hold on, to find joy in the simple and to share, even when you have nothing. If this topic is close to you, if you feel a resonance in your heart, if you want such stories to not disappear, subscribe to the channel, put a like, and be sure to share this video or text with someone who had a grandmother with bread, sugar, and a warm hand. More stories from the past, simple, powerful, and truly delicious, are ahead. See you soon.